Hi, it's George from Any Old Music. To understand the composition technique used by Arvo Pärt in Für Alina more deeply, I thought I would take the rules of Tintinnabuli that we established a few weeks ago in our Für Alina composition techniques article and video, and apply them in a series of exercises. The first of these will be a contrapuntal exercise that sets Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in counterpoint with different forms of T voice in A-aeolian or A natural minor. In advancing the principles of the first exercise, the second exercise will experiment with the harmony and tonality, discussing the effects of each of these changes. Similarly to the second exercise, the third will experiment with the harmony and tonality of the T voice. That will result in kind of modal experimentation between the two voices when they're placed together. The last exercise will be for me to create an arrangement of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, putting into practice the principles of Tintinnabuli that we've experimented with through this video. To start off then, we want to revise our understanding of the two types of voice in Tintinnabuli, just so we can recall what they are. The first of these is the M voice, or the melody voice. The M voice is the one that can use any tone of the relevant scale. In this video, the M voice will be the melody of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. However, as Tintinnabuli often uses minor modes, we will transpose Twinkle Twinkle into a minor mode as well. Therefore, the M voice will be Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in A-aeolian or natural minor. Similarly, the Tintinnabuli or T voice is restricted to the notes of the root triad. The T voice is the voice that we will experiment with the most harmonically and contrapuntally. These experimentations will let us expand the creative options available to us when we are using the Tintinnabuli principles. Now that we've revised these two types of voices, we can begin to remind ourselves of how they can interact and relate to one another. To do this, we're going to take the relationship and position relationships outlined by musicologist Paul Hillier. These relationships are first inferior, second inferior, first superior and second superior. We're going to use these relationships to reharmonize Twinkle Twinkle Little Star using each relationship in isolation. In the first repeat section of the first section, the voices are in a first inferior relationship. This relationship means the T voice is as close to the M voice as it can be. In other words, the T voice cannot have a triadic tone any closer to the M voice without being the same pitch or in a different position. For the repeat of the first section, using the bottom staff as the T voice, the voices are in second inferior. This relationship means the triadic note that the T voice uses are lower than the M voice, but another triadic note is available between it and the M voice. For the second repeat section, the same is true, however the position is now superior, meaning the T voice is above the M voice. For the first repeat of the second section, therefore, the T voice is as close to the M voice as it can be without being unison or placed into an inferior position. For the repeat of this second section, there is an available triadic note between the T and M voice. I annotate and lightly animate the score in the video to try and highlight these points. Our understanding of these voices and their relationships means that we can start to build experiments around how we harmonise our melody. The one that I want to explore here is what happens if we alter the tonic of the T voice and in later experiments the modality of the M voice. I am curious to see how this alters the feeling and colour of the music and whether the effect is something that we want to put in our final arrangement or composition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. To keep the experimentations concise and balanced in presentation, I decided to keep the textures similar, using only minims for the T voice. Furthermore, the T voice remains below the M voice in an inferior position. In reality, as you might have guessed, the experimentation was much less clinical and much more fluid and expansive than what I present here. Obviously, I had to, try and get everything into a digestible format and order for this video. While at the piano, I tested different voice positions and counterpoints, different tonalities and modalities, things like that. These come through much more in the final arrangement. Here the examples have been engraved to give a flavour of the effects that are possible. Looking at the experimentations now, we'll start with the one in C major, or rather the C major T voice against the A minor M voice. I particularly enjoy this major harmonisation. It maintains the simplicity one wants from a Tintinnabuli piece while adding, I guess, a layer and colour that is not present when the harmony is simply rooted in the same location as the melody voice. In C major, due to me opening the sketch in first inferior, the harmony tones are similar to what one would expect in A-aeolian. Therefore, the use of G natural, in my opinion, is a surprising but nice contrast when it finally emerges. The use of the G via the C major triad is also significant, as the melody and other harmonies do not use this pitch. Therefore, its use, much like how Pärt does not use the G in Für Alina, by avoiding the minor ninth relationship with the T voice that would be created due to its use of first inferior. It's a refreshing pitch to hear. The use of the F minor triad against the A-aeolian is similar in a way. However, the harmony is undoubtedly major from the off and only gets lighter in mood. The counterpoint of the F triad against the A minor melody creates a Lydian effect via the B natural. The brightest of the modes, the effect is still introspective but tinged with a sense of optimism, if we were to try and characterise it. The use of the D minor triad brings an interesting dichotomy, reinforcing the solemnity that Tintinnabuli can evoke through its use of minor tonalities. The feeling is a shade different to that of A minor alone. The B natural, again, like it did for F major, which is the relative major to D minor, creates a lighter mood too. In this instance, we get a feeling of Dorian, D Dorian that is. However, the closeness of the keys both being dominant related makes it all feel natural. As the final experiment in this exercise, I thought it would be interesting to test out a harmonisation that's very close and of a different modality to the A-aeolian melody, as I use B flat major in the following section against an adapted A Phrygian melody. I thought A flat major would be an interesting one to present here. The sharp dissonances, in my opinion, are very nice, and I like the effect of having the T voice occupy a triad that is so near yet so far from the M voice. The bitonality is made clearer due to that close dissonance between the keys and the fewer shared tones that they have. It's not something I use in the final arrangement, choosing to go much more straightforward with the T voices that I use. However, it was worth the exploration and could be something that I explore more in the future if I want a specific sound that matched what we got from the experimentation here. Moving on to the modal experimentations, these were more by accident in a way, more a juxtaposition of T voice and M voice in different modal and tonal locations, which creates a larger modal feeling between the two parts, the confluence of the two parts, I guess. Having played around with the T voice, I thought it would be good to experiment with modal adaptations and further different juxtapositions of harmony. Maintaining the minor modal quality, I limit myself to 3 experimentations that juxtapose A Dorian against D major, which creates a kind of D Mixolydian effect, A Phrygian against D minor, which creates D Aeolian effect, and then A Phrygian against B flat major, that kind of makes B flat Lydian feeling. Looking at the first experiment then with the A Dorian and the M voice in D major in the T voice, technically the effect here could be seen as D Mixolydian. However, I list them as A Dorian and D major, as this is how I thought about the two voices. From a listener's perspective, it depends really on how distinctly you hear the two voices. The C natural feels a significant and colourful note heard in bar 3. It recontextualises the two modes as one rather than distinguishing them, in my opinion. To have the modes be distinct and the effect more polymodal, the voices would need more different colour tones between them, similar to the A minor and A flat major juxtaposition in the previous section, which gave a more bitonal effect. In a tonal context where there is functional harmonic movement, the dominant could have been a substantial harmonic stress. However, in the context of a static underlying harmony, the D major triad, the feeling is much more restful. Now looking at the A Phrygian and D minor juxtaposition, A Phrygian in the M voice and D minor in the T voice, we get a kind of A-aeolian. Similar to the previous example, I list these modes as I've said, A Phrygian and D minor. However, the closeness of these two modes means that one could hear them as A-aeolian. That said, I think the separation is greater between the two voices here as a result of the modes that are used between them and also their distance from the original major tonality setting of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star itself. The best way of explaining what I mean here is by looking at the figure on screen regarding modes. If we look at this figure, we can see the modes as they appear on the circle of fifths. Moving anti-clockwise from a 12 to 6 o'clock position, the modes go from Lydian to Locrian, or from bright and resolved and major to dark, unresolved and minor. I think the separation and thus the bimodal effect between the two voices comes from the two fundamental modal characteristics. First, the distance between the Phrygian Twinkle Twinkle in this instance and its original major Ionian setting as we sing it, often as a nursery rhyme. Secondly, the two modes are unquestionably minor, and the confluence of them creates a much darker mode in comparison to what was Mixolydian before. Here we get an aeolian, which is distinctly minor. In the case of the last example, where we juxtapose A Phrygian with B flat major, creating a questionably B flat Lydian feeling, I think the melody is distinctly Phrygian and the harmony does little to alter this. B flat Lydian is not the feeling I get from this piece. However, I think the reasoning is slightly different and possibly easier to explain than the previous example. Simply put, the resting point of A for the M voice is at odds with B flat Lydian. It is a natural point of rest as the tonic. However, it is the tension-filled leading tone of B flat. Through the middle phrases of the piece, where the melody rests on B flat, the feeling is B flat Lydian. However, in the outer phrases, the separation to me is clear. In this sense, we get a form of both modal modulation and modal interchange, as Persichetti might put it in his 20th century harmony book. From A Phrygian over B flat to B flat Lydian, giving the experiment an interesting shape and colour over its short duration. Now finally coming to the arrangement of Twinkle Twinkle Tintinnabuli Star, or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in a Tintinnabuli style, I decided to use simpler combinations from the previous experiments for my Tintinnabuli arrangement of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. The reason being that I wanted to imbue the piece with the essence of the style that we're homaging here, while also injecting some semblance of original thought too. I also bring the hands closer together out of personal preference, whereas in the experiments I had the M voice often an octave higher as it appears in Für Alina. I therefore use only A-aeolian in the M voice and for the majority of the T voice. However, I also use C major and F major for small portions of the T voice close to the end to create that introspective optimism that we felt it conjured when experimenting with them two tonalities for the T voice. I also liked how using C major later in the piece held back the use of the G. Doing this added to the simplicity of the preceding sections, while also bringing vitality later in the composition. In arranging the piece, I adhere much more strictly to Tintinnabuli in the first setting of the melody. In the repeat, I alter the harmonies to provide variation. I do this not only in the form of the triads as I have discussed, but via the contrapuntal rules and relationships too. For example, at the start of the repeated section, Tintinnabuli positions were second to intervallic quality. I decided I wanted all the relationships to be open intervals. What I mean by open intervals here is that the intervals have a vertical relationship between a set of notes, a pair of notes, that provides us with no information regarding the modality or tonal quality of their relationship. So if we had a major or minor third, that would tell us something. If it was a minor third, it would feel minor. If it was major, it would feel major, whereas perfect fourths and fifths are just open, kind of neutral. In both sections I also play around with the relationship between the voices. For example, at bar 10 I used a technique that so nearly caught me out in the analysis of Für Alina. The beauty of Tintinnabuli is that it's an accessible approach to composition and great for kick-starting creativity. Like most of the simpler things in life, it's easy to get started, as I do here, but harder to really master. There is plenty of room in the rules for more exploration and manipulation. If you've enjoyed this video, then subscribe, click the little bell icon, like, and give us some feedback or questions below in the comment section. I've been George Marshall at Any Old Music. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.